Hi everyone, welcome to the channel. In today's video, we're going to start on making this stylized cartoon bear. This video is a little bit more beginner focused and slower paced. Big thanks to Alice Slipknot who requested in the comments that maybe I do a video on sculpting a simple Pokemon-like creature to maybe make things a little easier for people who are newer to sculpting. I thought it was a great idea and tried to do a Pokemon-like character, but didn't love what came off the sculpting brush, so decided to scrap it and just do something a little bit more traditional in the brown bear. In this first part, we will go over some built-in Blender add-ons I've enabled to make things a little bit easier, as well as some general settings in the viewport, and then complete the rough blockout like this. Then in the second part, we will join everything together, sculpt in some details, and then add some lights and color to finish things off. I've uploaded some reference images to my Dropbox to help with this first blockout stage in case you wanted a rough guide. There's a front, rear, side, and top view that we will import into Blender in the first part of this video. Okay, let's jump in. Okay, to start off, I just want to quickly go over some helpful built-in add-ons I have enabled. These are already installed on your computer, you just have to enable them. So up to the Edit Preferences menu, then to the Add-on section, you'll see the list of pre-installed add-ons here. Up to the search menu, I'm going to type Extra to find the Extra Objects add-on. To enable it, just tick the little box here. This add-on gives you the rounded cube and single vertex options in the Object menu, which are super helpful in sculpting and modeling in general. I highly recommend this one. Next is the add-on called Modifier Tools. This gives you the Apply All Modifiers option, which can be very handy. Instead of applying each modifier for each object one by one, you can apply them all with just one click. Next one is the Tri-Lighting add-on. This one allows you to quickly add in the traditional 3-light system commonly seen in movies, television, and photography. We will use this one in part 2. And lastly is the Node Wrangler add-on. This gives you a bunch of different shortcuts and options to configure and manipulate nodes in the shader editor. This is very handy and useful in all aspects when it comes to texturing. We will also make use of this one in part 2. I also have Align to View enabled for new objects under the editing menu, which gives a little bit more control when creating new objects. Don't forget to save your preferences after making changes by clicking here. When you have the little star in the box, it means that there are unsaved changes, so keep an eye out for that. Now for some general viewport settings, up in the viewport shading area on the top right here, I will start out in solid mode. Clicking here on this little arrow for the drop down menu, I'm going to select Studio and then Random down in the color section. This will give us the multicolored look when we're blocking out, which makes putting things together a little bit easier to see. You can also play with things like shadow intensity and cavity if you want to enhance the view even further. Now up to the Overlays drop down menu, I'm going to turn on the 3D cursor and origins. The 3D cursor shows where objects are spawning from. By default, it should be right in the middle of the viewport, and the origins show us where our mirror modifiers are mirroring over, as we'll touch on a little later in the video. And finally, up to the top right here in the Layer Panel Filter menu, I have a few more restriction toggles turned on: Select, Visibility, Display, and Render. These just make it easier to both change and see the status of our objects with respect to visibility and selectability. Okay, that's a good rundown for now. Let's get started with adding in the reference images. I'm going to press 1 on the numpad for front orthographic view, then Shift A for the Add Mesh menu, and then down to Image, and then Reference. Navigate to where you save the images and select the one labeled Front. It's looking a little bit small, so I'm going to scale this up by pressing S on my keyboard. You can hold Control while scaling to incrementally scale, as you can see up on the top left corner. As I scale up, the scale factor snaps in increments of 0.1. Okay, now onto the side image. 3 on the numpad to go to side view, and then add in the side profile reference image of the body. S to scale up again, and holding Control until the factor up in the top left corner goes to 5 to match the front image. Now for the rear image, Control plus numpad 1 for rear orthographic view. Shift A, Image, Reference, then S and Control to incrementally scale to 5. Holding Control while pressing any of the numpad numbers will basically give you the flip or opposite view. Now for the top image, 7 on the numpad for top orthographic view. You can rotate any object by pressing R on your keyboard. You can also incrementally rotate by holding Control, like we did for the scale. I'm going to hold it until the rotation factor in the top left goes to 180 degrees. Okay, so now all the images are bunched up in the middle of the viewport, which can make things kind of tough to see while we model. Pressing G will allow you to freely move it anywhere in the viewport, as you can see. But since we want these to line up exactly, I'm going to press Z on my keyboard to constrain the movement to just that axis, as you can see by the blue line that appears. Let's move the top reference image downwards. Now let's select the front image, G to move, and then Y to constrain to the Y axis. Then let's do the same for the other two images, G and then X for the side image, then G and Y for the rear image. You can also rename them over on the right if you'd like to keep your file organized. Okay, a handy little shortcut I use a lot is the decimal on the numpad. This focuses the viewport camera on whatever object you have selected, which makes things like zooming and orbiting a lot easier. Okay, so now you may notice that the image of the bear is showing on both sides of the image, which is kind of confusing, especially if we're looking at it from behind like this. To fix this, go over to the Object Data tab on the right and click on Front here. This will make it so that the image only appears on the front of the plane. This will make it so that when we go to rear orthographic view later, we won't see the back side of the front image, if that makes sense. You can also change things like the transparency of the image if it's too bright or you want to see through it. You can also change whether it appears in just orthographic view, perspective, or both. Up to you how you'd like to configure things. Okay, so now I'm just going to make some changes to the other images to match. A problem that can arise with reference images is that you may accidentally select them while you're working on your model. To remove the possibility of that happening, you can go over to the restriction toggles on the right layer panel we turned on earlier and turn off the selectability toggle, which is a little arrow or cursor icon. With that off, you can see when I go to select the image, nothing happens and it doesn't highlight. So now we won't accidentally move them while modeling. Also, so these images don't appear in the final render, I'm also going to turn off the render toggle, which is the little camera icon. Now we can see them in the viewport, but not when we render our final image. Okay, that's good for now. Let's get started on the blockout. Numpad 1 for front view, Shift A for the Add Object menu, then to Mesh, and then down to the rounded cube. You should see a menu over on the left pop up like this. If not, there should be a little box that you can expand in the bottom left corner. Then I'm going to increase the radius to 1 and then the arc divisions to 16. This will give us a good amount of control in the shaping stage. Okay, now S on the keyboard to scale up to about the size of the head or the purple object in the reference image. Numpad 3 for side view, and let's move it into place from the side to line up with the reference image by pressing G and then Y. Decimal on the numpad to focus the view on the sphere for easier orbiting and better zoom. Then Control Tab to pull up the mode pie menu, and I'm going to select sculpt mode. Control Tab is a nice easy way to move between each mode quickly, and you'll notice over on the left we have a bunch of new brushes that we can pick from. The cursor is now a circle, which denotes the size of the brush. To change the size of the brush, you can press F on your keyboard or up here on the toolbar. To change the strength of the brush, you can press Shift F or up here on the toolbar. For the shaping stage, I'm just going to use this one brush here, the Elastic Deform brush. I'm not going to use any other brush as this is all we'll need at this stage of the game. Okay, so pressing F to make this brush a little bit bigger. I'm going to start pulling in the sides a bit to match up with the head in the reference. It should be on by default, but make sure you have X symmetry on up here in the top toolbar. If you can't see the reference image very well, you can press Alt-Z to toggle X-ray mode or press up here. You can continue shaping with X-ray on to better line things up. Don't need to be exact here though, obviously. Okay, numpad 3 for side view. Let's continue shaping to roughly line up with the image. Here I'm focusing on the purple sphere here in the reference. A super helpful sculpting shortcut is holding Shift with any brush. This turns whatever brush you have selected into the smooth brush. I use this shortcut all the time when sculpting, and I find it a great way to shape things as well. Okay, so I'm happy with the shape of the skull for now. Let's move on to the snout. Instead of adding in another cube, you can Control Tab into object mode, select the rounded cube, and then press Shift D to duplicate it. I want to keep it directly in the middle of the viewport to maintain symmetry in my model. So I'm going to press Z to constrain the movement like we did earlier for the reference image, and then move it down a bit to line up with the blue snout in the reference image. Then S to scale it down, numpad 3, and then G to move it in line with the image. Numpad 1 for front view, and Alt-Z to toggle X-ray mode to see where we're at with the shape. Looks like we need to pull it out a bit. Then a little bit of smoothing by holding Shift. Numpad 3 quickly to check that the side hasn't changed too much with the pulling out to the side, and it looks okay. Okay, now Control Tab into object mode, and let's Shift D to duplicate, and then Z to constrain again, and then move it down for the nose, then S to scale down a bit. Numpad 3 for side view, and let's move it more in line here. Then just more shaping with the deform brush and holding Shift to smooth. Okay, now I'm going to speed up the video for a couple of minutes as I repeat this same process for the middle part of the body. Control Tab into object mode, Shift D to duplicate, then Z to constrain to the middle. We want to try to maintain symmetry here. Then S to scale as needed. Then Control Tab into sculpt mode, and then just use the deform brush to shape it in line with the reference image. Use Alt-Z to toggle X-ray mode to see things clearer if you want, and hold Shift to smooth and shape as well. I'm also using numpad 1, 3, and 7 here for the front, side, and top views respectively to get a shape close to the reference. Okay, once you're happy with the middle parts of the body, let's move on to the arms and legs. Numpad 7 for top view, and then I'm going to Shift A and add in a rounded cube. But this time I'm going to use a preset shape called the capsule here in the menu that pops up on the left. It doesn't look too different, but when we press numpad 1 for front view, you can see that we have a longer pill-like shape, which nicely matches up for the shape of the front leg. Now control tabbing into sculpt mode. When I start sculpting, you may notice that it kind of behaves a little bit oddly, and you can't get the soft curve of the arm like in the reference, as the sides of the capsule stay straight as we pull back and forth. This is because of two things. First, X symmetry needs to be turned off here, and second, we need to add geometry into the middle of the capsule. Tabbing into edit mode, you'll notice that there aren't any vertices in the middle, only on the ends. The more vertices you have, the more control you have when sculpting. To add more vertices, press Ctrl R to add a control loop. Then you can play with your scroll wheel to increase the amount of loops. Here I'll add something like 8 or 9. Left click to confirm, and then Control Tab back into sculpt mode. Now when we use the deform brush, you'll see it starts to react to your brush better, and we can start shaping in the soft curve of the front leg as we did before. Okay, now for the front paw, I'm going to Shift A and add in a new rounded cube with radius 1 and 16 arc divisions. Then move it into place like this. Now S to scale up. Numpad 3 for side view and moving it into line from this view as well. Like we did before for the move function, I'm going to press S to scale and then Z to constrain the scale to just the Z axis to kind of squish it down to get it closer to the general shape before we start sculpting. This makes things a little bit easier. Now Control Tab into sculpt mode, and we can do just the final tweaks on the shape. Now for the back legs, numpad 3 for side view. Let's select the front leg and then press Shift D to duplicate, R to rotate into place. To give some shape to the objects instead of sculpting, you can also use proportional editing in edit mode. I'm going to tab into edit mode and then press Alt and left click the loop here near the end. This will select the entire loop at once for you, very handy shortcut. Then you press Shift and Alt left click to add the next control loops to your selection. You can also just press Shift and box select vertices as well to add to your selection like this. Okay, so with those vertices on the end selected, I'm going to press O on my keyboard to turn on proportional editing. You can also turn it on up here. Now when I press S to scale up, you'll notice a gray circle appear over your selection, which is the area of influence of your proportional editing. You can change the size of the area of influence with your scroll wheel. Here, as I increase it, you'll see the vertices within that circle now get scaled as well, albeit at a diminishing magnitude. Now rotating to line up with the reference image and then some more shaping and smoothing as before. Now I'll Control Tab into object mode and Shift D to duplicate the front paw to make the back paw, S and then Z to scale in the vertical, and then more sculpting to get the final shape. Okay, so that is the brunt of the shaping. Let's mirror the legs and paws over. Shift select the front and back legs, then over to the modifier panel on the right with the little wrench. And we're going to go up to the Add Modifier menu and select the Mirror modifier. Now you'll notice that the back paw, which is the last object of the 4 I selected, mirrored, but it looks strange. And that's because the mirror modifier uses the origin point, which is this little orange dot here, as the mirror axis, or the point that it flips over. To have it move over to the other side, we need it to flip over the middle part of the body here. To move the origin point to the middle, you can press Ctrl A and then select all transforms. Now you'll see that the little orange dot moved to the middle here, and the back paw is on the other side of the body like we want. Now that's awesome, but you'll notice that the other objects we selected aren't mirrored over. This is because the modifier is only added to the active object selected. To have it be added to the other shift selected objects, we can press Ctrl L and then select modifiers from the menu. This links the modifiers of the actively selected object to the other selected items. You can also do this with materials and other attributes, as you can see in the list. Now everything is mirrored over, which is great. For the ears, I'm going to Control Tab into object mode and then Shift D to duplicate the nose, then Control Tab into sculpt mode, and then with the deform brush, just going to pull it around to line up with the image. Then, like we did before with the legs and paws, over to the modifier panel on the right and add in a mirror modifier. Again, it doesn't mirror over like we want since the origin point is not in the middle of the viewport. So let's Control A and select all transforms to reset the origin point to the middle. Then finally for the eyes, Shift A and then adding in a UV sphere this time and not the rounded cube. Adding in a mirror modifier, then Control A to reset the transforms. And that's it for this video. Hopefully you have your bear blocked out something like this. In the next video, we will join all the separate objects together, sculpt in some details, and then add some color and lighting to finish things off. I just want to give out a couple of shoutouts. Shout out to Pavel Shushenko on Twitter, who finally finished my ogre character and did it better than I did. Great modeling details and great texturing. Check out his Twitter or ArtStation. And also shout out to Mohey3D on Instagram, who is a new Blender artist that made this awesome rendition of an ogre with the help of the Blender community. Thanks for the shout out, guys. Great work. If you want to share your art or ask a question, I have a little Facebook group going, link is below, or just hit me up on social media somewhere. I love seeing your guys' stuff. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. I hope it helped, and see you in the next one.